First, I'd like to start with a question. How many of you have ever taken any form of like online homework assignments, online reading assignments? Raise your hand. Yeah, I figured, okay. So the next question would be, how many of you have actually taken a full online course? Which is where like the only time you ever see your instructor is like for a midterm and a final, that's it. Okay, just a few of you. So over the past few years, online learning has just been growing and growing and growing. It's been getting more and more advanced, more and more personal, and overall pass rates get higher and higher. And for the most part, the learning that involves just the assignments and the reading, those are really good to kind of boost the learning capacity of these people, of the students. And for the online courses though, I believe that the online courses are actually more detrimental than having just a normal course. You may be saving time, you may be saving maybe a little bit of money, but you definitely do not have as much to work with than if you did with a lecture. And so my claim today for you is that traditional learning materials that you have in front of you, the textbook, your lecture, they continue to have advantages over digital delivery material. And the points I want to get across today for you is that the in-person lectures, the ones where you sit in front of a professor as he lectures, are more effective than online readings and videos. That social and teamwork skills are more akin to classroom tasks than they are to make message boards and online learning. And then lastly, how actually as of recently that textbooks are starting to look a little more promising than new books sometimes. So I'll get to that in just a second. But first, let's jump into the lectures. So you're sitting in your classroom in front of your instructor, and he's writing stuff on the board, and he's going over what you need to know for the class. First of all, when you're in that setting, a human is present to assist you with any of your questions and your concerns. Whereas when you're sitting online, you have to go through either email, a message board, maybe a video chat if you're lucky, but there's no human interaction, truly. A quote from Peter E. Peterson, he is the director of education policy at Harvard. He states that I listened to many of them insist that students could learn only if a professor was at the other end of the log, or at least wandering about the room. And when he says log, he just basically means at the other end of the course, like you can eventually get to the professor himself instead of going through some other fashion. So the second point on that note is that your lecture notes, when you're taking notes, a lot of people still take notes with hands, right? Some people, they're starting to learn how to take notes electronically. But overall, I think that notes are actually more focused in a classroom than they are in an online setting. And this is very true, especially for certain subjects like English, communications, things of that nature, where you're going through the book online and you really, truly have no idea what you need to. Well, you kind of do, but it's a little bit more difficult. You have to pick out the sentences that you need, rather than if you're sitting in a lecture and your lecturer is going over what you need to know and what's important to read in these specific places of the book and what you should take notes on. I feel like that is a more focused approach than trying to figure it out on your own when you're learning in that online course. So with that, we move on to the second point. So in addition to your professor, you also have your students all around you. These students can help you out and build, help you build you up, and you can build them up. So the social and teamwork skills that you have developed throughout your life are more keen to the classroom tasks than they are to like online discussion boards, online anything. And so, for example, you students will learn to cooperate with peers to solve problems rather than check online solutions. And I know you guys, if you've ever taken math classes, maybe once or twice, you've probably gone on Chegg to find that answer because you just can't figure it out, right? But sometimes I know people, they learn from that, they learn to understand that. Sometimes they just plagiarize and then they fail their midterm because they didn't learn anything. And so with that, the next part of this is that students can converse thoughts and ideas faster through physical settings rather than through online settings. And I have a quote here from John Roeder of the University of Auckland. He says that in these contexts, in these online contexts, there may also be little authentic engagement with ideas or with human beings. It's a lot harder to discuss, certain ways of solving problems, especially through online chat boards and maybe even video chats and things like that. And the last point is textbooks, right? Why would you ever want a textbook? You don't want an ebook. So the biggest reason why is because more and more ebooks through these different publishing companies are starting to make them subscriptions rather than actual full-fledged books. You lose them over time. I have 2 textbooks right now that are going to expire in December, and I need to take 2 classes for them. So if I don't take them in the fall, I have to pay that full price for both of them again. And with that, I conclude. I'm glad that, I'm done.
Gesundheit.
Thank you.
All right, Bryan, let's start with a couple of things that worked pretty well. There's a very good preview of what the supporting structure is going to be, and you signpost those points in the body of the speech well, so it's well organized and easy to follow when it comes to the structure. I think your proposition is clearly identified. It gets a little complicated and convoluted as it's phrased, but I do think that it ultimately works at making it a claim of fact. There might be a simpler way to express it. It would be something that you'd have to work a little bit more on. I know I gave you some feedback on it, but it still sounds like it's, it's a little knotted trying to get to what it is you're talking about there. Yeah, there's got to be a simpler and more elegant way to phrase it. Your proof is you have 3 or 4 pieces of information that you cite sources on. It's very generic information. I thought it was starting out pretty well because you had some information talking about how students learn better when there's a person there, and I thought, okay, so we got a piece of testimony that talks about that. It comes from a credible source, but there's no data to support it. There's no example except the hypotheticals that you present. There's no research other than this person's opinion, and they do seem like they're a credible person, but we don't know what their opinion is based on. So other than their credibility, we don't have any data on that particular point. And I find that a little troubling because this is a field that there's a lot of research on. Education is like one of those subjects that gets researched all the time. It's people, every person out there who's working on a PhD in education has to write about something and write a dissertation, and that's probably the field where they generate the most PhDs. So there's a lot of stuff out there on this kind of material, and it just feels like you skimmed it at best, that you're missing opportunities to make a much more convincing argument. There's no statistical information in the presentation. You do have some hypothetical examples that you explain pretty well, and I think that that's admirable because we want those hypothetical examples that's easy for us to relate to. Most people will be able to stick to that, but I'm not sure that you want to be able to generalize from that. Your personal experience, for instance, on the e-textbooks at the end is not a bad way to start, but it would be nice to have some information that says the trend is towards subscriptions, or that the average student has to repurchase a subscription 3 or 4 times. I'm not exactly sure. Did you drop a class? Is that why you have to hang on to those books for some other reason?
They're meant to be used for 2 quarters because I have 2 classes back to back.
Well, then I think that's the thing that you kind of have to explain, and that's stuff that's missing here in the argument. So it's just one of those things that's a little bit awkward. I appreciate your watching the time. I want everybody to pay attention to the time. But when he sticks the thing up that says time, that doesn't mean or we're going to cut your tongue out. You know, you could probably finish the sentence that you were in the middle of at that particular point, and you just kind of like, you looked over there and it was like hitting a brick wall, stopped right in the middle of the sentence. Okay, done. You want to be a little bit, we've got a little bit of leeway here. Okay, thank you.
I don't know why.